Isaac Newton didn't invent the gold standard, but he accidentally helped build the system that would control empires, bankrupt nations, and define the price of money for the next 250 years. Everyone says Newton put Britain on gold in 1717, as if he waved a scientific wand and declared, "This shall be the metal of truth." But that's not what happened. There was no formal gold standard law, no royal decree to abandon silver, no grand economic design. Instead, there was a subtle pricing error, a simple conversion, a line in a report to the Royal Mint, and it changed the financial world. Here's the paradox. The gold standard, often portrayed as the ultimate rational system, was born of a miscalculation. And not just any miscalculation, Newton's. If you learned about this in school, unlikely, it probably sounded like this. In 1717, Sir Isaac Newton set the official price of gold at 4 pounds, 4 shillings, and $11.50 per ounce, helping Britain adopt the gold standard. That's technically true, but it's like saying the Titanic slightly grazed an iceberg. What they don't tell you is that Newton undervalued silver, and by fixing the gold price too high relative to silver, he quietly drove silver coins out of Britain and made gold the de facto ruler of money. Why would Newton, the greatest mind of his time, make such a mistake? Because he wasn't trying to create a new system. He was trying to stop a crisis, a very 17th century crisis. Coins were disappearing. Not virtually, not through inflation, physically. Melted, smuggled, shaved at the edges. Silver was flowing out of England like water through a cracked pipe. Newton, as master of the mint, wanted to plug the leak. But in trying to stop one drain, he opened another. By making gold slightly too attractive, he set off a chain reaction he couldn't have foreseen. It wasn't a scientific breakthrough. It was a monetary trap. And empires, first British, then American, would spend centuries reinforcing it. Not because it was fair, because it gave them control. If that already flips your view of history, keep watching. Because behind the name Newton was something deeper, the first pricing trick of modern finance. And the trick still works. To understand what really happened in 1717, we have to go back, not just to Newton, but to the strange, broken world of English money in the late 1600s. Imagine a country where coins are more valuable as metal than as money, where shopkeepers bite coins to see if they're real, where silver is disappearing, not from inflation or printing, but because it's literally worth more melted down than spent. That was England in the 1690s, and it was falling apart. See, at the time, silver was the foundation of the English currency system. The pound sterling wasn't a paper promise, it was a weight of silver. But centuries of clipped coins, worn edges, and uneven minting had created chaos. People weren't sure if a shilling was actually worth a shilling's worth of silver. Counterfeiters thrived. Foreign merchants avoided English coins, and silver kept flowing to Europe, where it could be traded for more than its face value. The solution? A grand recoinage. In 1696, the government ordered all old silver coins to be turned in and reminted to restore order. But this raised a new problem. Once the coins were reissued, the silver kept disappearing again. Enter Isaac Newton. In 1699, he became warden of the Royal Mint. 2 years later, he was promoted to master of the mint, a job he took very seriously. Newton wasn't just a scientist. He was a moralist. He hunted counterfeiters personally. He viewed honest weights and measures as divine obligations. Money, to Newton, was not just a tool, it was a mirror of justice. But by 1710, Newton faced a dilemma. The official mint ratio between gold and silver in England was out of sync with the real world. At the English mint, 1 ounce of gold was worth about 15.2 ounces of silver. But on the continent, in France, in the Dutch Republic, in the rising financial hubs of Europe, the market ratio was closer to 14.5 to 1. That tiny gap was all it took to tilt the entire system. If you had silver, you'd trade it abroad for gold at a better rate, then bring the gold back and exchange it for more silver. Arbitrage, infinite loop. The silver vanished. Gold started to dominate. This wasn't a secret, it was a loophole known by bankers, traders, smugglers, but the English government refused to move. They feared devaluing the silver coin and the political backlash that would follow. So in 1717, Newton made a different move. He didn't change the value of silver, he quietly adjusted the official price of gold. He issued a report recommending that the guinea, a popular gold coin, be fixed at 21 shillings. That sounds harmless, but it wasn't. At that fixed rate, gold became just a bit too attractive. Foreigners flooded in with gold, swapped it for overvalued silver, and drained the last drops of England's silver supply. Within a few years, silver coins had all but disappeared from circulation. Not by law, not by decree, but by market logic. Newton hadn't built a gold standard. He'd priced silver out of the system. The Royal Mint stayed bimetallic on paper, but in practice, Britain had become a gold country. Not because Parliament voted on it, because one man changed a number. This is the birth of modern monetary engineering. A central figure, armed with data, morality, and unintended consequences, adjusts the price of one thing, and the whole economy shifts. And once the silver was gone, there was no going back. Empires are rarely built by revolutions. They're built by small rules that nobody questions until it's too late. Now comes the strange part. After Newton's price fix in 1717, silver vanished, quietly, almost politely, from British circulation. And yet, no one panicked. In fact, the country prospered. This is how monetary illusions begin. Because nothing felt broken. Bread was still bought, taxes still paid, soldiers still funded, coins still clinked in purses. They were just gold now. And the new gold-based system didn't feel like a trick. It felt like progress. The guinea was stable. Trade boomed. The British East India Company, the Bank of England, and private financiers all flourished under this golden glow. And as Britain began to dominate the seas, something else became clear. The world would trade with you if your money was stable. It would borrow from you if your money was trusted. And it would obey you if your money was gold. That's the real pivot. Not just from silver to gold, but from coin to credit. Because once the system began to behave like a gold standard, it opened the door for something far bigger than metal. Confidence. With gold as the anchor, banks could expand. The Bank of England, founded just 23 years earlier in 1694, began issuing more and more banknotes, backed, allegedly, by gold. And Parliament, strapped from endless wars with France and Spain, found a new trick: borrowing. Here's how it worked. You needed money to fight a war, but you didn't raise it from taxes, too unpopular. So instead, you borrowed it from bondholders. In exchange, you paid interest from future taxes. And what secured this trust? Gold, or the illusion of gold. This wasn't just clever accounting. It was the birth of public debt as a national strategy. Because gold made promises believable. And promises, not coins, began to power the economy. Look at the pattern. First, Newton prices gold just high enough to drive out silver. Then, Britain floats effortlessly into a gold-only reality. Then, credit expands based on that illusion of gold backing. It's a magician's trick. The rabbit is gold. The hat is trust. And the audience, the people, never see what's underneath. The empire grows, and money, once physical and local, becomes abstract and global. Ships carry goods, yes, but behind every shipment, credit notes, insurance contracts, bills of exchange, paper claims to future wealth backed by the aura of gold. This is what made Britain the financial capital of the 18th and 19th centuries. Not its army, not its navy, its credibility. But there's a catch. The illusion works only if no one calls it, if everyone agrees to treat gold as the base, even if there's not enough gold to cover the claims. Because once you promise more gold than you have, you're not on a gold standard, you're on a confidence standard. And confidence, like silver, can disappear overnight. Still, for over a century, the trick held. By the mid-1800s, Britain wasn't just using gold, it was exporting it. The British gold standard became the international rule. Other nations joined, not because they believed in it, but because credit depends on conformity. If London priced in gold and you wanted London's money, you priced in gold too. Like a financial cartel, soft power, enforced not by bayonets, but by balance sheets. People believed it would last forever, because gold is real, because Newton was a genius, because the system had worked, so far. But systems don't collapse because of bad intentions. They collapse when numbers outgrow gold, real income, or trust. If you're still following the golden thread, share this with someone who still believes the gold standard was natural. Here's the irony of every perfect system. The more stable it seems, the more pressure it builds underneath. By the late 1800s, the gold standard wasn't just a British practice, it was a global rule book. Germany adopted it in 1871, France followed, America locked in by 1900. Every major empire tied its currency to gold, not paper, not silver, not trade, gold. Why? Because gold enforced discipline. You couldn't print more money than you had metal in the vaults. You couldn't inflate away your debts. It sounded honest, rational, unbreakable. But here's the catch, and it's one of the most important things in economic history. Trade grows faster than gold. Let that sink in. Gold doesn't reproduce. It's mined slowly, painfully, and in finite amounts. But debt? That multiplies. Every time a bank issues a loan, every time a government sells a bond, every time a war must be funded, the paper side grows. The gold does not. By 1913, just before World War I, the world had built a tower of credit on a foundation of metal. British pounds, German marks, French francs, American dollars, all promising gold on demand. But there wasn't enough gold to meet those promises, not even close. This wasn't a surprise to insiders. The Bank of England knew. The Banque de France knew. J.P. Morgan knew. It was a shell game, and as long as people didn't all ask for their gold at once, it could go on. But then came 1914. World War I shattered the illusion overnight. Mobilization required money, fast. Britain suspended the gold standard within days of declaring war. Germany too. France followed. One by one, the promises were broken. Gold convertibility was temporarily halted. But that temporary suspension would last years, and in some places, decades. The math had finally caught up with the politics. There were simply too many paper claims, too many promises made in peacetime that could not survive wartime. And this is when the truth emerged. The gold standard wasn't built to serve the people, it was built to control them, to limit their governments, restrict their options, and protect creditors. Think about it. Under a gold system, governments can't easily spend to stimulate an economy. They can't run large deficits. They must pay their debts in real metal, which benefits lenders, not citizens. When the system broke, those lenders panicked. They weren't interested in rebuilding prosperity. They wanted their gold back. So after the war, the powers tried to put the system back together. The 1925 British return to gold at the old pre-war rate, £4.86 per dollar, was hailed as heroic. But it was a trap. Prices had changed. Wages had changed, global demand had changed. Only the illusion stayed the same. By fixing the pound at an overvalued gold price, Britain triggered deflation. Exports collapsed, unemployment surged, debt burdens grew heavier because money was now scarcer. And guess who benefited? Creditors, banks, bondholders. The same class that had profited under Newton's unintentional trick now used the gold standard to extract real wealth from collapsing economies. When the Great Depression hit, the gold-linked system became a straitjacket. Nations couldn't print, couldn't stimulate, couldn't save their own industries. France hoarded gold. The U.S. bled it. Germany cracked. By 1931, Britain again abandoned gold. The U.S. followed in 1933. France held on a little longer, then finally let go. The gold standard, hailed for over a century as the most stable monetary system ever devised, had collapsed under its own arithmetic. Not because of corruption, not because of war alone, but because you cannot peg the growing weight of the world to a fixed pile of metal. If Newton's rule began with precision, it ended with delusion. The system was never about balance. It was about control. And when that control became unbearable, the world had to break it. You'd think the fall of the gold standard in the 1930s would be the end of the story, that the world, burned by metallic promises, would learn its lesson and never peg money to something finite again. But that's not what happened. The gold standard didn't die. It morphed, from metal into code, from gold into the US dollar, from scarcity into managed scarcity, an illusion dressed up as discipline. Here's how it worked. In 1944, as World War II neared its end, global powers met at Bretton Woods to build a new financial system. They wanted stability. No more currency chaos, no more beggar thy neighbor devaluations, no more hyperinflation. So they compromised. Only one country would stay tied to gold, the United States. Every other country would tie their currencies to the dollar. It was a clever design. The dollar became the world's reserve currency, and gold stayed in the system, but behind glass, like a museum artifact. The trick was this: $35 equals 1 ounce of gold. Fixed. Non-negotiable. Foreign governments could exchange their dollars for gold at that rate on demand. It was the Newtonian price fix, reborn. But once again, the math didn't hold. By the 1950s and 60s, U.S. spending on Cold War programs, on Vietnam, on global expansion, began to grow far beyond its gold reserves. Dollars were printed, loans issued, bases built, all under the assumption that America still had the gold to back it. But it didn't. By 1971, the U.S. had only enough gold to cover a fraction of foreign claims. The game was up. So President Richard Nixon, on a Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, announced that the U.S. would temporarily suspend gold convertibility. In plain English, we owe you gold, but you're not getting it. It was Newton's trick in reverse. This time, gold didn't drive silver out of circulation. Paper drove gold out of money. And once again, the world didn't collapse. Trade went on. Markets adjusted. Most people didn't even notice. But something had fundamentally changed. Money was now pure credit. A government IOU backed not by metal, but by confidence. Or more precisely, backed by military strength, tax power, and global trust in the U.S. system. And this modern system, still carries the same DNA Newton never intended. A price is set, the foundation appears solid, and everything, loans, savings, pensions, global trade, is built on top of that appearance. But here's the twist. Today, there is no anchor, no gold, no silver, no fixed anything. Central banks manage stability with interest rates, bond buying, and digital balance sheets. They inflate the supply when needed, contract it when threatened, and create trillions in credit out of keystrokes. And yet, the illusion still holds, because as long as you believe your money will be accepted tomorrow, you'll use it today. As long as banks trust other banks and central banks trust each other's currencies, the engine keeps humming. But behind that hum is a dangerous rhythm, because the same pressure Newton accidentally created, the mismatch between real limits and paper promises, is now worse than ever. In 2020 alone, central banks around the world created over $10 trillion in new liquidity, not from taxes, not from gold, from nothing. And who benefits most? The same class as before: creditors, banks, asset holders. Every time central banks flood markets with liquidity, the value of your wages, your savings, your purchasing power declines in slow motion. But the price of stocks, property, and debt rises. Just like under the gold standard, money flows upward. Today's system may look nothing like Newton's. No coins, no guineas, no mint. But the mechanism is the same. Price the foundation just right, build an empire on top, and hope no one asks for what's underneath. Isaac Newton was chasing precision. He wanted to fix a broken coinage system. He believed, like any scientist, that the right ratio, the right formula, the right standard could bring order to chaos. But money isn't physics. It's trust, power, and memory. And that's the warning. The world still believes in anchors: gold, the dollar, Bitcoin, a central bank promise. But systems don't collapse because the anchors disappear. They collapse when the weight of claims becomes too heavy for the anchor to bear. That's what happened in 1717, in 1931, in 1971, and it's happening again now, not with gold, but with debt. Every promise, a bond, a pension, a deposit, is a claim on future value. But if the foundation is just policy, just belief, then the future can't be guaranteed. It can only be managed or delayed. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We've built a civilization on pricing tricks. A tweak here, a peg there, a quiet suspension of convertibility wrapped in the language of temporary necessity. But arithmetic never forgets. It waited for Newton, it waited for Nixon, it waits now. If you're hearing this in 2025, know this: there will be another shift. Not because someone is evil or stupid, but because we still pretend that money is scientific when it's political, that value is objective when it's negotiated. The next system will not be chosen in a meeting. It will emerge from necessity, like a river changing course after a flood. And unless we understand the roots, the weight, the balance, the illusion, we'll be fooled again by the next standard. Because every trick needs a magician, but it only works if the audience wants to believe. If this series showed you that money is never just about metal or math, but always about power, share it with someone who still thinks gold was the honest age. They need to see how the trick really began.